Glenn, thank you so much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast. I've had a week, Glenn, where there's been some fluctuations at times, and I've just thought to myself, with this 4 p.m. meeting with yourself today would be just the perfect way to round off the week. So I'm very grateful for your time today.
I, you almost stole my words there, Mark. I don't know quite what to say to that. Well, you set me up for the top villain, so I can only fail now.
As you're aware, Glenn, the way I kick this off with is with the question of, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
I've no doubt there is. Probably there are many questions which I have been exploring and will continue to explore. But it's quite challenging to try to narrow that down to any one in particular. And I've given it some thought in a quite general way. And I think I'm influenced by my upbringing and my experience with my family, my parents, my grandparents. And I never really thought about it much when I was a kid, but I realized looking back as I got older that they did a lot of work for the community, their local community, and made a difference in their own different ways. And I've come to realize as I've got older that through the different work I've done, and perhaps particularly in my most recent career, I've, in my own way, been able to make a difference for people. And I think that's, for me, is certainly one key element of life. And what's important for me is making a difference and taking the opportunity to make a difference rather than sitting back and expecting life to come to you.
Out of interest for you, Glenn, could you give us a sense of the distinction almost of taking the opportunity to make potentially make a difference, and maybe how that's evolved in your own life?
Yeah, I think an obvious example that springs to mind for me is my work within university. I only went to university education in my 40s and to the first degree and then a master's degree, and went eventually on a convoluted path into becoming a university lecturer. And I was not just me, but I was, I suppose, one of the prime movers in the word innovative is used too much in my humble opinion, but I was one of the prime movers in what was regarded as a very new and innovative program to open up um, university education to people who wouldn't have contemplated university education before. So it was called um, an outreach program for fairly obvious reasons, I guess. And it allowed people who were typically mature, already in work, in all kinds of different jobs, very ordinary jobs, let's say, to be able to study in the evenings or occasional weekends in their locality and being taught by people like me who'd been out in the real world, had done a variety of ordinary jobs, and then was in a position to share their knowledge, my knowledge with them, and to be able to relate to them as well and speak their language, if you like. Because I can cast my mind back to my university education, which was very different how it evolved in this outreach program I led, where we were far more approachable. So yes, I think that's a good example of taking the opportunity of making that difference. Because as I think back, and I led that program for about 8 years before I went on to other programs. As I think back, I remember saying to students at an awards ceremony on my final year there back in early 2020, that I'd played my part in the team as the program manager of overseeing more than 1,000 students gain a university degree. And almost all of them would have been people who thought they would never do so. And not just the paper qualification, but it changed their lives. It really did. A couple of outstanding examples I can think of is one person went on to a senior job in the NHS, and another person went on to a senior job in the National Botanic Gardens in Wales from very former humble roles. And it's just given confidence. So, um, yeah, for me, making a difference is important. And it's easy not to. I've worked with a lot of very clever people in university, academically much brighter than me, I would say. But perhaps sometimes some of them um, may, well, no doubt for a variety of reasons, perhaps because a lot of them have been on the education path throughout their lives. Maybe they find it difficult to appreciate what other people, the concerns, the fears even that other people have about education, and perhaps don't feel so inclined to step into that space, to take the opportunity to reach out to others. Um, One thing I've learned over the years is, and it's quite funny thinking back, I would describe myself as quite a private person, and certainly when I was younger, quite shy. Still a private person, still fundamentally a quiet person, but I've gathered a lot of experience and confidence because of the different things I've done. So I often find that one of the biggest challenges for people is a lack of confidence. Even people who apparently seem quite confident. Take them into a different situation, slightly out of their comfort zone, and people really struggle, even if they don't seem to. So one thing I have a knack of, if you like, to use an informal expression, I'm pretty laid back, I'm pretty relaxed. I'm also, so people tell me, quite good at putting people at their ease. And I think that's so important and has helped me to maximize that opportunity of me reaching out and encouraging people to take that step forward.
Out of interest, what do you, and having shared multiple conversations with you before and shared spaces with you before in different groups, I can attest to the laid back or easygoing company or putting people at ease. For you, where do you think, you're mentioning, okay, a bit shy, a bit, could happily to be not kind of in the limelight, I guess. Where do you think that ease came from? Is that something that you've generally experienced in life? Like, is it just purely by going through? I know you've told me before different roles that you've had and different places that you've moved in coming into education in your 40s. What do you
Yeah,
think has contributed to that?
really good question, Mark. And I think realistically, there's no one factor. There's a range of variable factors that are influenced it now. I think I feel that I have an inner calm or an inner peace, if you like. But I think that that is not just from within me. I think that's also from without as well. And I don't mean to sound too new agey, if you like, when I talk about that, but I know that we have similar interests, let's say. So I think that I have a calmness about me, and through experience in various roles and interacting with others, and also I think as I've grown older, becoming more comfortable with myself, which reminds me of some things I used to often say to professionals in the workplace I work with, or students, master students, let's say. And this touches on the confidence thing I mentioned a moment ago. I'd always encourage people to believe that they're enough, that you are enough, and you don't have to be wonderful or following the seven marvelous steps of whatever it is on LinkedIn, etc. That you really are enough. And surprise, surprise, We all make mistakes. We all fail. And guess what? That's okay. That's how we learn. Be a little kinder to ourselves. Be a lot kinder to ourselves, actually. And forgive ourselves. People were often quite uptight about having to do a presentation, whether that's in work or an academic setting. And again, I'd say very much the same to them. You're going to make mistakes. Don't try and learn it off by heart. Have confidence that you know enough to tell a story around what you know. Because people want to know your story. They don't want to know the basic, boring facts. As long as you basically covered the main aspects, they want to know something of you. So you have to share that with them.
I think that's absolutely gorgeous, Glenn. Like, just out of interest, the sense of you are enough. And this is something that I find really quite poignant in life. The extent that I perceive people not to feel that. And how I think, and I, much like you, when you talked about, when I asked you about an ease in yourself, there'll be multiple factors that contribute to it.
Mhm.
But I think whenever one does feel enough, you realize that it probably hasn't come about in any of the ways in which I would have thought feeling enough would have come from. And having had some of the things that would have made me think that I was going to feel enough, not making me feel enough, and realizing this sense of enoughness is, I sense, available to us all, just not if we keep on externalizing it to some degree. But you said something really interesting there too, and even in the context of that and public speaking, to share some of yourself. And why? What made you so convinced that that would be it? Like, or not to say that that would be the key to unlocking enoughness, but why did you?
Yeah.
Why did you feel inclined to push that or forward that?
I think I've been lucky in the sense that as part of my university career of more than 20 years, I have had that opportunity to lead that quite different kind of program, which is reaching non-traditional students, as universities would call them. In other words, ordinary people, I would call them. And they need to be, they need to feel that you're there for them and you are willing to open yourself up to them and be vulnerable. You don't have to tell them your innermost secrets, but you need to be genuine and available to them. And I can remember making some um, opening talks for students on residential weekends on that program. And what was really lovely about it, because I just wanted to make them welcome and explain what we were going to do together, is they would give me a standing ovation at the end of what I've said, which the first time it happened was really surprising and wonderful. But then it kept on happening. Twice a year I did these residentials and it kept on happening. And over the period of time, people would come up to me and volunteer what they felt. And that was that they felt welcomed, accepted for who they are, not just welcome, but accepted. That's really big. And that they'd realized that, yes, okay, they may be 30s, 40s, or even in their 50s. But if Glenn could do that in his 40s with looking after children as well, then I can do it. And yes, Glenn struggled, and Glenn had a bit of help from grandparents. So maybe I can do it as well.
Were there, when people were offering you what they were experiencing from it, was obviously the example that you were giving, or the kind of the path maybe that you could have been sharing,
Yeah.
was there anything in particular that was resonating strongly with them?
Yeah, a few things were common to many people. They generally felt they weren't good enough as a person. They certainly felt they weren't good enough to be studying at university level. So they lacked confidence generally. And many of them, I feel, and some of them shared this with me, many of them felt that they'd never really been listened to before or believed in before. And as you know from one or two previous chats, Mark, I'm friendly with Johnny Moore, and I've run several unhurried conversations um, in those university settings, and they've all been very interesting, and some of them have been particularly moving. A couple of which come to mind are one with a mixed Chinese and UK group of students, about two-thirds Chinese, one-third UK, masters, part-time students. And the Chinese group opened up in that session and spoke far more freely than they ever would in a formal classroom situation. No matter how much you try in a formal classroom situation, their culture, they're not so used to that. But the unhurried conversation space allowed them to open up. The other one which comes to mind, linked to what I was talking about a moment ago, one lady at the end of an unhurried conversation, when we had the informal chat, she said that was the first time in her life that she'd ever felt really listened to. So she was emotional about that. And quite a few of the men in the group were also really moved by it as well. So it's wonderful.
Isn't isn't there something kind of, I don't know, I don't even want to use the word poignant again, but there's something kind of simple to this life. Like, I think we're looking for really complicated solutions to problems, while we're not interested in doing just some of the real basics of good relating. And we
Yeah,
have to come up with theories that are peer reviewed or whatever else, that, like, for how we can change the world. And we seem to want to skip or pass over or not acknowledge the significance of really listening to each other.
absolutely. Well, listening, there's another thing which springs another mutual friend to mine, Colin Smith.
Mm.
Listening. I'm sounds silly to say it, but I'm very interested in listening, in the concept and the activity of listening. And I've talked with my students about listening and run various different little discussions and games with them. And something else you were saying just a moment ago reminded me of the way my teaching stroke lecturing has evolved. I prefer facilitating actually rather than teaching or lecturing. The way my approach with people has evolved over time. Whereas when I was taught and when I started teaching, it was very structured. It was learning objectives, lesson plans, outcomes, blah blah, and that's great. There's strengths to that. But over time, my approach evolved to be not unstructured, but much more fluid, much more flow, if you like. So that I would, in certainly for many years now, I would go into a classroom. Okay, uh, I know what I want to talk about, generally speaking, but I wouldn't use much on the screen. I would tell stories, and I would have discussions with my students, and I would want to know what they thought. Because yes, I talk to them about theories, models, frameworks, so that they have the basic information and knowledge they need. But I'm more interested in how they are embracing this knowledge and how it is becoming meaningful to them and how they might consider applying it in the real world. And those discussions, those rich discussions amongst the students, facilitated by me, were far better learning opportunities for them than listening to me or somebody else teaching in the traditional way.
I think we've got to a point where, I don't know, I think we're seeing the limitations of information. And,
Mm,
as you say, look, teach people some models, teach people what they need, the core of what they need to know.
yeah,
But there's something, if we're talking about someone learning or prospering, like the idea that somebody is engaging with them in an environment where they're believed in and listened to. Like, I
yeah,
think, I even think of raising a child or whatever it might be, and just the significance of that attention to give another. And I think it's far, like, in so many of the things then, that when you pay attention in some to somebody else, this can be a spouse, a partner, whoever, um, to see the effect that that actually has
mm,
on another. Um, for
yeah,
somebody else to really feel and notice in real time that somebody really appreciates me as I am.
yeah,
If we're talking about the capacity to learn from that state versus, just here is the technical information, maybe even told in an entertaining way, or a
yeah,
charismatic
yeah,
way. Like,
absolutely.
what you're talking about there really seems to be like the relationship almost, if it comes first or
Very much
not,
so.
but it's a huge part of it versus the information first.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Mike. I think it is about how my students, learners, perceive my approach to them and the relationships, the potential of the relationships which can be formed, and not just in my classes between myself and my student, but between my students together as individuals and as a group. It's giving them that space to explore themselves and explore the opportunities that exist within that classroom together, which wouldn't happen in the traditional classroom generally.
Just curious, and I've never actually asked you this in our other chats. What was it like to then you've ended up in this business school. What was it like to transition from, like, was there a point where this would have seemed like a ridiculous life path for you? Like, I know you mentioned there when Glenn was struggling maybe with raising children and needing the help from grandparents and then studying in the
Well,
evenings.
yeah, I can go back to my memories of infant school and junior school, kind of 5 to 11, where typically I would always be pretty much top of the class or in the top three, without having to seemingly work too hard about it. And then when I went to 11 plus school, comprehensive school, as it's often known in the UK, I just did really average there, distinctly average, if not poor, actually, which made me wonder, oh, why? And I didn't have an answer at the time, and I'm not sure I have an answer now. Um, but as I moved through life, I thought, well, I don't think I'm that. I don't think I'm stupid. And I might not be academic in the traditional sense, but I clearly have something between my ears. And so I did various career paths, steelworker, police, um, had my own business, looked after my kids. What else? Worked in the Ford Motor Company, um, civil service, ran a program there in the department, and academic jobs in different universities. And well, I kind of got on the academic path almost by completely unplanned, by accident almost, I could say. The people who who had been my tutors, obviously trusted me, liked me, and they gave me an opportunity to be a guest speaker initially. I did that once or twice, and that went well. And they gave me opportunities to be a part-time tutor. That went well. And very quickly, I found myself being given opportunities to teach part-time in 3 universities at the same time, which was fun because I was actually doing my master's degree at the same time as well. So Glenn was a busy boy then. But I think through my various life experiences and my various careers, and obviously me as a person and all the things that have influenced my development, I think I just grew gradually into being a university tutor. But I definitely would say that I've become a far better tutor in my later years than I was at the start. And that's not just confidence, that's this almost indescribable evolutionary process that has taken place, which is very hard to put into words, but it's partly confidence, it's partly, perhaps mostly, becoming more at ease with myself and saying to myself that I'm good enough and I don't have to overplan because I know my subject matter. So, hey, Glenn, relax, be yourself, and tell them a story. And guess what? It works. It really, really works. I've seen the responses when Glenn just relaxes and be himself. And yes, I know my subject matter, the different things I teach, but they want something of you. They don't want the dry stuff. They want something of you. What does that subject mean to you? And I want to know what it means to them. And they can feel that from you.
How have you noticed, like even just looking back at that transition or shift, like what do you think has kept you open to such changes? You know, some people could get stuck in their ways, like you know, even people could be find a life path in their 30s, even if they don't like it, and they'll remain there.
Yeah,
And they'll
yeah.
just kind of stick to that and defiantly almost. And you can kind of, I think of even some people that I could have known 20 years ago that I could cross paths with now and kind of go, there's not much has changed there. Other people, obviously, I could think something very differently.
Mm,
What do you think kept you open to just this shifting in your relationship with yourself?
fantastic question, Mark. I think curiosity plays a big part in it. Certainly, I have a curiosity about other people and equally about myself. What makes me tick? What makes another person tick? Um, what Lots of things come into my mind there. What do we have in common? What are our differences? And being accepting of differences. And that's something which is all too often lacking in many when we look around today. Being tolerant of differences, being okay with being uncomfortable. And it's okay to feel you don't know everything, because who does? It's okay to be apprehensive, lacking in confidence, nervous. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to completely forget what you're going to say, because that happens to me sometimes. And So a curiosity for me about people, a never-ending curiosity about myself and our human condition, and I think I mentioned I'm quite laid back and relaxed. I think I have, or I can have. I don't always have this, but I can be very tolerant. I can be very patient. Sometimes I'm not, but then that's okay because I'm human. But I think I think my general persona, which people recognize, makes people feel at ease. And I think that has helped me to continue to explore myself and to continue to reach out to others. And I'm quite sure that many people are at different stages on that journey, and many people are still perhaps at the very early stages, and they are struggling undoubtedly because of that. Now, I don't know how far I might be along that journey. Let's imagine a 12-inch ruler, I don't know. But I don't think there's any limit to our development, potentially. And also, I have a wide range of interests in lots of things. And I'm very interested in energy, our own energy, the energy that's around us, the people's energy, and um, intuition as well. And sometimes I play with that in classroom situations where, whether that's through role play or just following kind of non-traditional paths of not so much teaching, but finding out about ourselves. So I'm really open to almost anything, provided, and if it's a university setting, when I say almost anything, I mean provided I think that's acceptable to the
Yeah, yeah,
university and
yeah.
education, etc. But yeah, uh,
But Glenn, you've said here this curiosity thing I think is really interesting when in combination with something else you said, just in terms of the way I felt it, maybe it's just the way I experienced that, but
okay,
there's a humility almost to the weight of the human condition. Like to the, I can be my own person, I can have my own reactions or responses to life. And yet there's also a lot that seems to be that we hold in common about this human experience, which can allow me to make mistakes. And in whatever way that you want to attribute that or apportion that.
yeah, yeah,
But there's something to it where I think if you get really curious about it, it takes a lot of the punishing kind of aspects of self-inquiry away from it. Like,
mm,
and the more that we pay attention to other people, and the more that we even engage in conversations where people let us into their world,
yeah,
I think that is another area where we can really just kind of see, okay, I could continue to berate myself for that, but it seems like this happens to a lot of people. Do
mm,
you know what I mean?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think curiosity is such an important aspect of life. One thing I used to say, I say I used to say because I just recently retired within the last 3 weeks, which I'm still on cloud nine about that. It's just really not. I didn't love my job and my work. I absolutely loved it, which is why I worked to the age I did. But yeah, I'm enjoying not having to think about work for at least a while now. So it's wonderful. So but I used to say to my students that one thing, if I only succeed in one aspect of my time with them, it would be that I help to develop and encourage their curiosity. Some students would get that straight away, and some students wouldn't. So then we'd have a chat about what do you think Glenn meant by that?
Yeah.
And I'd encourage them to chat it and share their ideas. and then we'd have a laugh about it. I mean, it's not what they're used to.
No.
This isn't a normal lesson. This isn't a normal tutor.
Just literally wrote on my hand there curiosity as a topic for a silent conversation. So that's probably one of the first times in my
Yeah,
mind that one of these
absolutely.
conversations has just gone in a completely different direction. But I wanted to ask you about how we how you kind of see that curiosity, or do you see that curiosity having opened up a pathway or a door into these explorations then of intuition and energy? And not even just maybe say you think while you're thinking about that maybe a little bit, but just I think the capacity to go into spaces, and I think we share a lot of similarities maybe in how we approach
Mm,
not being overly structured in groups.
yeah,
But in that there's an inherent acceptance that if I'm doing something I haven't got planned, that I'm not trying to brainwash myself out of being crazy confident. I can be open to the fact that I'm actually unsure or I feel uncomfortable about this, but I think it's worth trying.
yeah,
And there's something about that practice and intuition for me that if I can just let go of the idea that it has to be perfect, or if I can allow myself the space to make mistakes, or it maybe goes beyond my wildest dreams in terms of what I've tried, that opens up a space to kind of lean into that intuition.
yeah, absolutely. That reminds me of my occasional advice to students. And these would typically be master students who had to write, say, a report or an essay on a particular business-related topic. And I'd say things to them like, yes, I would want to see your understanding and knowledge of the fundamentals that we've covered and you need to address within the assignment or whatever. But guess what? Glenn is particularly and most curious about what you've taken from this learning. In many of my modules, I would set two assessments. One would address the boring fundamentals. The second one I could call my curious assignment. It's where I give the student a complete open house to do a short video clip on their reflections of what they feel they've learned with me in the module. And there were no restrictions, no boundaries on that. It could be anything. And typically what they would cover would be, and this would vary from student to student, it would be a certain amount about what they've learned in the tangible things. But the ones I used to love, and this would come up quite a bit, the ones I particularly used to love listening to is the students who would share what they'd felt
Hmm.
during their time with me. What they'd learned, but what it has meant to them and the difference it has made to them through feeling it. And I know, and many of them have told me that their experience with me in my modules is different to the experience they've had elsewhere, and that they feel they've learned more as a result, not just about the topic, let's say strategic management, by way of example, but learned more about themselves as people, how they are as individuals, how they relate to other people, and the really I was going to say bright students, but that's probably not the best way of putting it. The really most interesting short video clips I would love to watch would be the ones who reflect forward of what difference this might make to me in life in the future. And then I think I kind of know I've reached that person. I've made a difference.
What a wonderful invitation. And I was thinking it was almost like you're running a self development course in tandem with in tandem with an
Well,
academic course, like
I
because
think we both agree that education should be about that,
yeah,
to some extent at least. Okay, well, education changes so much now, AI, and there's another debate in itself. In the last couple of years, I've asked my students, because I played a small role in AI in my university. I've asked my students, what do you want? What do you feel? Do you want to be taught using a lot of AI in the future? Do you want to be taught by AI entirely? Or do you want a mixture? Or do you want traditional tutor? And the vast majority want a tutor, a person to teach them. Okay, drawing upon the benefits of AI, etc., but they want a person because that is what really makes the difference. There's a lot of coverage in the media about AI and pros and cons, etc., but there's also a lot of, unfortunately, lack of understanding, including in the media. And people, for my two pennyworth, people always need to be able to relate to others, and people who are want to learn. And traditionally, it's been somebody like me who's facilitated that for them. They tell me they still want somebody like me to be there in the future for them, to be the guide, if you like, um, drawn upon as the things which are available. One of the loveliest things I've came to realize during my teaching career is that I kind of know I was doing a decent job because the attendance rates in my class was sky high compared to others, and students were asking to be transferred to my class. So I guess that means to me that I'm doing something reasonably okay. But I was always curious to know why, and it's because of the relationship
yeah,
and the
yeah.
curiosity.
But I think just in life in general, and when you mentioned AI there, just my mind kind of went to scenes or images of self checkout queues.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
instead of maybe asking your local barista what song is that they're playing, you could just take out an app to find out what song it is.
yeah.
Uh, Getting your food delivered rather than going to the supermarket. And now, whatever about those being not like consistent relationships in a learning journey, but I just mean we've kind of we've kind of cut out so much human interaction, and so much is done in the name of economics or efficiency. And I don't think we have any idea what sort of damage we're doing to ourselves by not having the attention and the contact with one another. And
Yeah,
it's almost
yeah,
like we find our humanity an inconvenient um, element of any of these equations. Like, because it seems to
mm,
me we consistently underweight its significance. And so much of what you're sharing just seems to point that it goes way beyond the balance sheet, like it goes way beyond the transaction.
absolutely. I've been in a position in the past where I've been a manager, a senior manager, or director level in different organizations, private and public sector. And I look back on my experiences then and what I studied on my own MBA kind of 25, 30 years ago. And the world, in some respects, has changed a lot, but in some respects, it hasn't. And I'm really interested when you mentioned a few things just now about linking to AI and people, the balance sheet, profit, etc. I think this is my perception that big business is very focused on the balance sheet, and understandably so. But the danger with the immense influence that large organizations and tech companies have is that they are going full steam ahead in a direction which they believe is appropriate for their business needs. But I have major concerns about the wider view of what is right and good. And those are two potentially volatile, quite volatile words, what's
Yeah,
right and
yeah.
what's good. But I just have concerns that in the rush towards efficiency and minimizing costs, raising profits, etc., that we are dehumanizing ourselves and that we are in danger of allowing tools such as AI, because that's all it is, it's just a tool, to not only influence us, but to actually tell us or direct us or expect us to do things. And there lies madness to me.
Okay, and you just sparked a noticing of mine in a cafe that I rarely attend in Berlin. I overheard a conversation where a recent mother was talking about how she just puts all this data into an AI, an AI app or whatever it was, and it tells her exactly when to put the child to bed or what when to feed it and this kind of thing. And when you said the word madness, like obviously I'm not going to say something. You know me, my approach is to parenting is very different, in that I think this can be as innate a thing as there is if we just really pay attention.
Yeah,
Um, and that's also just from everything you're saying. I think with that attention, that builds a relationship and whatever else. But just the idea that we could think that a technology could could know it, our relationship with a child, our own unique child, and our own unique perspective as a parent.
absolutely.
I must say, like I wasn't even harshly judging this person. I was just kind of like
Yeah, yeah,
shocked. Like, and I think if we're so willing to just hand over that level, or we're willing to be that subordinate that it would actually encroach in
yeah,
that area, I do find that madness. But
yeah,
there's something you said though that I think it's what allows this to happen. And I think what your approach even to your students would have been encouraging something else, i.e., how do you feel? And therefore, that opens to me a gateway towards intuition again, which a lot of us, I think, cut ourselves off from.
mm,
But this invitation to feel is almost, we're continuing to live this life and go in these kind of directions. And I never get too pessimistic about humanity because I just think there's so many wonderful moments, and there's so many wonderful people,
yeah,
that it doesn't let me go that way. But the way I see it at the moment is this life that we're moving in the direction of and experiencing presently. It also, you mentioned dehumanizing, it finds our feelings very inconvenient. You
hmm,
know, there's so many ways in which we have to numb our feelings in order to maintain that life or maintain those
yeah,
perspectives. And I think it finds feelings very inconvenient. And consequently, we're engaging with lives that potentially look good or look good on our own personal balance sheet in some cases, but
yeah,
they don't feel good. And I think that's a really interesting component, just
mm,
again as to how maybe we think things should be versus what
yeah,
it actually the experience of this life is.
yeah. That reminds me of reasonably recent conversations with my students over the last few years, since AI has become more in their minds and more relevant for them. I'd have discussions with them about what do you think about AI? So we'd have discussions around AI generally. We'd play with it in the classroom. For example, I might ask them to make them a task to look up a certain topic area, um, do some research using whatever AI model you want to find. Let's have the findings. So then they're pleased with themselves, they got the findings, and I say, okay then. So now, working in groups, I want you to analyze those findings from different AI models, and I want you to critically analyze them and start pulling them apart. That was great because then they were able to begin to realize, oh, well, AI does have its uses, and it's really good in some areas, but gets things wrong, and it
Yeah.
makes assumptions, and it doesn't have that balanced view potentially that we as people have. That that links to another aspect as well. The other discussion I've had with my students has been very interesting. So, students, do you want? What are your feelings about AI marking your work? How do you feel about that? Would you be happy with AI marking your work entirely, or a tutor using AI as well, or just your tutor marking your work? So, going through that stage by stage almost, they don't want AI to mark their work. Sorry, the first bit I should say about is they are wary and apprehensive about the role of AI in their lives and feel they have little or no control over it. They are wary and concerned about how AI may impact their education. And they're aware of the possible advantages, but they are quite concerned about the possible downsides. In terms of marking their work, I would say over several hundred students I've had this conversation with, not one wants AI to mark their work.
Hmm.
And when I've explored those reasons, it's because they don't have the trust in the AI. They don't feel that the AI would be capable of having the insight which somebody like me as their tutor would have into their responses, because AI, for example, could be very good in analyzing straightforward answers which hit the criteria and target areas, but may well struggle with more subtle responses, which I, with my humanity and experience, can see where the student was going with that, and that they clearly did have a good understanding, even though they didn't answer A, B, C, D in the order kind of thing. So to summarize it, the students don't want AI to mark their work. Some of them would be okay with AI being used as a tool for me to mark their work, but they would all want that human clarity of a tutor. They know who they've met, who they've worked with, marking their work, and giving that human explanation built upon the relationship I've already had with them.
You know, throughout even much of the course of this conversation, I think it kind of reinforces to me the sense of just how much we've taken our shared humanity or our capacity to be human with each other for granted,
Mm,
or how much we undervalue its significance. And, when you were opening up with the sense of how do I make a difference, and, seeing how your parents would contribute as well
yeah,
in their own different ways, and taking the opportunity then to do something meaningful. And for you, even in your change of careers into academia,
yeah,
using your experience and what you could empathize with others to trust and believe in
mm,
them, the significance of telling people that they are enough. Like, that expression, I think, always gets some sort of emotional resonance in me and other people. There's something, I think, very deep that runs very deep in that sense of us not feeling enough, or a lot of
yeah,
people not feeling enough. and just the simplicity almost of what you were bringing to that, like just tell your story, like give people part of you. And I really think, I hadn't thought about that before, but I really think that is a really practical, pragmatic way of realizing your enoughness, like seeing how people respond to you in that circumstance. And then, what you were saying, like the real sense of believing in other people. I think we hand over, or we become subordinate to technology a lot more when we don't feel that sense of being enough or believed in. And
Yeah.
the significance as you've got moved on in life through your career, and of being yourself and realizing you could trust that.
Mm.
And really that being brought about by a curiosity in both yourself and other people, and
Yeah.
that allowing, it seems to be brought on by increasing our reflections on our feelings, to even entertain or engage in spaces where it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to feel nervous when you're trying something new,
Absolutely.
and it's okay
Absolutely.
to fail if that's the case, but just
Yeah.
to give it a go. With all of what I've said there, though, Glenn, and with all the ways that you've moved, like these different moments or these different transitions in your life to what you're
Yeah.
reflecting on now, just really intrigued to ask you the question of what is a good life for you?
That is such a powerful question. Uh, my feeling is I don't have a good enough answer. But if I tell myself I'm good enough, maybe I should try. What is a good life for me? And I think you mean right now, Mark? Is that it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a good life for me now is enjoying my suddenly free time with my wife and family, and having time to explore even more who I am, what's around me, what possibilities there are, what opportunities, links to curiosity again. And again, back to something I mentioned earlier, hopefully that whatever I do, it will make a difference in a positive way. So I think all of those things are chucked together in a bucket, if you like, and that's a good life.
Well, Glenn, it's has ever been a delight to speak with you. I do this semi frequently, so apologies for it again. I generally comment on your voice. I think for anyone listening, I think you've got a voice which is just good for our nervous systems to listen to. So, look, I really appreciate all the insights and experiences you've shared, and thank you so much for joining us today on the What Is a Good Life podcast.
A pleasure, Mark. Thank you very much, Mark. Take care.